Chapter 2. A Responsible Person. Little Dorothy rose the next morning with a sense of glad possession and vastly increased self-importance still upon her mind. She was an aunt. She measured herself against the cupboard door to see if she had grown since the night before. She deeply regretted that her hair was not long enough to do in a grown-up plait, and that the tail of her frock would not admit of letting down. An aunt with short skirts and cropped curls seemed bereft of half her dignity. She recollected herself just in time, however, to keep from jumping the last 3 stairs into the hall, for whoever heard of an aunt descending to breakfast in that fashion? She also sat upon the extreme edge of her chair throughout the meal, that her feet might rest properly upon the floor. She was determined to act up to her newly acquired character, if possible. She paid a visit to her nephew before going to school, and to her extreme satisfaction found him wide awake. His eyes were of a dark blue, and she felt quite sure that he looked at her with much interest, if not intelligent recognition. When his tiny fingers hooked themselves into the lace at her wrist, just as she was wishing him good-bye, she exclaimed with delight, "He knows me already, the darling. He doesn't want me to go. He's holding my sleeve to try and keep me." But it was rather a disappointment to learn that several months must elapse before baby would be able to call her by her name and title. Of course, she had not been in school 10 minutes before all the girls had heard the news. Most of them were interested and sympathetic, but one, Stella Pearson her name was, said, "Your nose will soon be put out of joint." "What do you mean?" asked Dorothy, instinctively feeling that feature to see if it were all right. "Why, now that your brother has got a baby of his own, he won't think so much of you." "Yes, he will, I am sure," said Dorothy. "He can love ever so many. There's enough of him." "Well, your sister won't. You'll be nowhere beside that baby, you'll find." Dorothy still protested, but Stella said, "You'll see," and a dash of bitter was thus added to the little aunt's full cup of joy. Stella thought herself very clever, I have no doubt, but the seeds she had so headedly scattered were the germs of the most horrible poison plant that ever grew in the human heart. Its name is selfish jealousy. Dorothy's nature, however, was too sweet and true, and the sunshine of her brother's love too constant, for the wicked things to develop. They shriveled up and died without doing any lasting harm. Everard had always told Dorothy that though Stella was pretty and talented and lived in a fine house, she was not a nice girl to know. He had so judged from what his little sister had told him of incidents and conversations that took place at school. She had sometimes thought it a pity that he did not like Stella, whom many courted and admired. Now she was glad that she had minded what he said, and not made Stella her friend. She could not but see that such remarks as the latter had uttered about Everard and the dear baby showed a mean and ugly disposition. One day, before the little stranger was a week old, Everard found Dotty intently studying a small old-fashioned story-book that had belonged to his mother when she was a child. It was called The History of Little Anne and Her Aunt. She was trying to gain from it a few hints as to proper auntly conversation and behaviour, but the only impression she contrived to gather was that little Anne's aunt knew absolutely everything, and was able to answer every question little Anne might put to her, and she did ask some very hard questions, right off just like a book. This was not encouraging. Certainly baby showed no sign just at present of such a painfully inquiring mind, but a vision loomed up before Dorothy's imagination of having to prepare herself by learning pages upon pages of geography and chronology, to say nothing of universal history and biography, for the time that such stories of information should be required. Her brother guessed what she was about. She had asked so often during the past few days, "Should an aunt do this?" and "Must an aunt do that?" But he did not laugh at her. He drew her to his side and said with gentle seriousness, "You want to be a good auntie to our pet, don't you, darling?" "I should like to be the very best auntie that ever lived," answered Dorothy with fervour. "The very best aunties are always made out of the very best girls," Everard said. "You just be as good as ever you can, Dotty. Always ask the dear Lord Jesus to help you, and you needn't worry yourself to try and get a grown-up head on your little shoulders. Give that up, Dotty. Take my advice. Trying to seem anything we are not is the hardest work in the world." Dorothy was silent, considerably impressed by the extent of her brother's knowledge. Sure enough, she was beginning to find her new role undeniably laborious, especially when she had realized it was unbecoming auntly propriety to skip or swing, or buy halfpenny sticks of chocolate cream, and 2 and 3 times already she had broken through her self-imposed rule of always walking sedately to school in the middle of the path, and of denying herself the fascinating excitement of Who's He. "Nothing next to downright naughtiness," counted Everard, "is less pretty in a little child than the aping ways of grown-up people. You know what happened to the 3 little pigs, don't you?" "No. What little pigs were they?" "Foolish little pigs, that wanted to seem bigger than they were, and they kept silent and wouldn't eat, and in the end pined quite away, all because they couldn't say ugh, 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 and wouldn't say wee, wee, wee." Dotty laughed. She saw the application of the story nevertheless. When baby gets old enough to understand, he is almost sure to copy you in everything. If he sees you obedient, he too will mind what is said to him. If you are patient and good-tempered, he will learn to be the same. If you play gently with him, he will not be rough. If he hears you always speak exactly the truth, he is not likely himself to think of telling a lie. It will be a very great and serious thing to have a little nephew looking up to you as a model, and I am hoping much for my baby boy from the example of Aunt Dorothy. If she continues to be a good, bright, natural little girl, all will be well." Dotty had listened very gravely and attentively while her brother was speaking, and she certainly felt that a weight was lifted off her mind by his words. She responded heartily to his concluding kiss, and then ran out into the garden to enjoy a game with her battledore and shuttlecock, which had been rigidly abjured ever since baby came. They were very pleasant weeks that followed. Every day before she went to school, and the first thing on returning home, Dorothy went up to Miriam's room to see her darling nephew. And every evening when her lessons were done, she was allowed to nurse him in the low wicker chair. The sense of honour and responsibility that thrilled her in these moments, the exquisite delight of feeling that tiny soft head on her arm, that precious living weight in her lap, were beyond expression. The bud of mother love planted by God in every little girl's heart was strung in Dorothy's, and that half hour with baby was the happiest in all her day. He grew beautifully, continually developing fresh charms. Before he was 3 weeks old he twisted his dear little face into a funny little screw that Nurse Hopkins assured Dorothy was a smile at her. And once he showed his affection for his aunt unmistakably by seizing her nose as she bent over him and holding it fast. When he was rather more than a month old, he was dressed in a flowing robe of embroidered lawn, and a snowy cashmere cloak with silvery flowers embossed upon it in silk, and a handsome white hat. Thus arrayed he was carried to church and christened, and Dorothy, as well as Everard and Miriam, asked God to bless his little lamb and keep him pure and good. Dorothy added, "And please make me a real good auntie, for Jesus Christ's sake. Amen." The names that baby received were Theodore Everard. The first, her father told Dorothy, was just the same as hers, only turned the other way about. Both meant the gift of God. His surname was Custairs, like that of Dorothy and her brother. They all thought that Theodore Everard Custairs would sound very well. It was a glad, beautiful time. Everard and Miriam seemed to love each other more dearly even than before, and though they both loved baby so very, very much, they were just as good to Dorothy as ever they had been. All three were as happy together as they could be. But sad to tell, sunny as their lives looked, a great trouble was already on the way. It was indeed close at their door.